Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. In this solo episode, I want to talk about a very common struggle, which is overeating at night and especially losing control around sugary foods. I have a lot of clients who start working with me and they're going through this challenge. So I want to talk you through why it typically happens and what you can do to overcome it. First of all, the reasons why it may happen are usually one of two. The first one is that you tell yourself that you're simply not hungry in the morning or throughout the day. And in some cases, you may genuinely not feel hungry. For example, if you are on ADHD medication, that's likely to suppress your appetite. And as a side note, if you do have ADHD, I have a whole podcast episode on how to support ADHD with nutrition, which I recorded with Steph Smith, who is a coach and educator in this area. That was episode 59, so I strongly recommend that you give it a listen. Now, another reason is that you may be saving calories for the end of the day because you're afraid of going to bed hungry. And you may find that you crave sugar in particular at night because you often avoid, if not always avoid, foods containing sugar because you perceive them as bad. Now, whatever the reason may be, or it may be a combination of all of these reasons, the end result is that after dinner, the proverbial floodgates open and you end up emptying the pantry. Now, what most people think that they need to do in order to circumvent this issue is that they need to be more disciplined and they need to knuckle down and restrict these sugary foods that they're craving. Now, let me tell you that a lot of the people that I coach have already tried that before they start working with me, and it doesn't help. And if anything, it makes things worse. Now, here's what's happening. You may genuinely feel that you're not hungry throughout the day because you've trained your body not to expect food, and the body is an incredibly adaptable machine. If you repeat the same behavior for long enough, it's going to adapt to it, even if it doesn't help it thrive. So now your hunger is suppressed, whether it's because of your behavior or because of medication like ADHD meds, or because of a combination of the two. However, at the end of the day, that suppressed hunger is catching up with you when your medication wears off or when you can finally relax. Because another reason why hunger may be suppressed is that you simply have so much to do throughout the day, you're always on the move, that you don't really think about food. And then at night, you're not really doing anything. And what happens? All of a sudden, you're thinking about food. Finally, you're developing a scarcity mindset. And this is especially true if you are saving calories because you're afraid of going to bed hungry, and or if you perceive sugar as a bad food or a bad nutrient. Now, the definition of a scarcity mindset is that you subconsciously fear that food won't be available. And the reason for that is that you've been restricting either calories or certain types of food for a really long time. Now, this type of restriction is psychological, so it doesn't necessarily result in a visual outcome. Sometimes people with a scarcity mindset are on the leaner side because by restricting psychologically, they've actually managed to be in a calorie deficit for at least some time, and so they've lost body fat. However, you can definitely experience this scarcity mindset even when you are in a larger body. And this can be just as common because we are bombarded with dieting messages irrespective of our body size and shape. So, at this point in the podcast, I've already told you that being more disciplined and restricting these foods isn't going to help. So, I'm going to tell you instead what I do with my clients. And the name of the game here is to implement a regular eating structure with time windows for each meal and each snack. And I have an entire podcast on how to create this eating structure, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I am going to put a link to the episode in the show notes in case you didn't listen to it when it first came out. In addition to that, I also strongly encourage you to start eating earlier in the day if your first meal is quite late. For example, if your first meal is around 11 a.m. or 1 p.m., and you typically wake up around 6 or 7 or even earlier, you want to have a meal a little bit earlier than that. In addition to that, eating the majority of your calories earlier in the day also seems to be beneficial for your circadian rhythms, according to some research on chrononutrition. And this is important because your circadian rhythms run your body. So if you act in better alignment with them, your body is going to respond better to training and to nutrition, and it's going to truly thrive, which is what we're trying to do by looking after our nutrition and training behaviors, aren't we? And one of these circadian rhythms is related to the release of hunger and fullness hormones. So by acting in line with those circadian rhythms, you're also going to support the release of these hormones, so you're going to experience less overwhelming hunger so late in the day. The next suggestion is to have regular time windows within which to eat. So not only to have an eating schedule with meals and ideally at least one meal early in the morning, but also to keep these meals as regular as you can. Of course, there's going to be variation and life happens. Maybe one day you'll have to skip a snack, but try to stick to the same routine as much as possible. If you normally have breakfast at 7 a.m., then you have lunch at 12, and then you have a snack at 3, and then you eat dinner at 7. Try to stick to these time windows, give or take half an hour, most days that you're able to. The next suggestion is to increase the size of the earlier meals. Because when people are struggling with overeating at night, it's typically because they're grazing during the day. They're eating the equivalent of a small snack and they're calling it their breakfast or their lunch. Or they're going without eating at all, even. No wonder you're going to be freaking hungry at the end of the day. So you need to increase the size of the earlier meals. And while appetite doesn't seem to be solely regulated or primarily regulated by caloric intake, because you can actually be in a caloric surplus but still feel hungry, and vice versa. You could be in a deficit and actually feel relatively satiated. I normally find it helpful to give clients even per meal targets. So when I say even, I mean that I'm assigning them roughly a similar amount of calories at each meal. So as a random example, if they eat 4 meals a day and they are on 2000 calories, then they're going to aim to have roughly 500 calories in each meal. And when I also educate them on how to create a balanced plate, typically those meals tend to have a similar size. And the size of the meal, the physical size, is actually going to affect whether you feel hungry or satiated. It's one of the factors involved. So that is going to be helpful, more so than the amount of calories that the meal contains. However, if you start with the calories and you also get education on how to create a balanced plate, then the outcome is usually an even portion size for each meal. Now, sometimes people are chronically under fueling, so they're chronically not eating enough calories, at which point you don't only want to increase the size of the earlier meals, but you also want to actually consume more calories so that you are at least at maintenance calories. Because if you're below maintenance, if you are even in a small deficit, but it's been going on for months now because you've been restricting for that long, then you are going to experience not only a psychological scarcity mindset, but also genuine hunger, because that's what happens when you're in a calorie deficit. Saying that, if you've trained your body to expect little to no food throughout the day, you may not be able to eat a larger meal comfortably just yet. Or if you are on ADHD medication, you may not be able to stomach it. So that's when we want to use food choices to support you. And that might mean that you're still eating calories earlier in the day and more calories earlier in the day than you were eating before, but they are in an easily digestible form, like a smoothie or a protein shake. These are simple ways in which you can digest these calories without too much digestive discomfort. And over time, as you train your body into this new routine, you may be able to progress to larger meals or solid food. In other cases, some people may find that they can already stomach bigger meals, and one easy way to do so would be to move one of the meals or snacks that you're now eating at the end of the day earlier in the day. And that's something that my client Elijah, shout out Eli, has found super helpful. He was having a lot of snacks after dinner, which was then really affecting his sleep and his energy levels as a result as well. And we simply moved a couple of them earlier in the day, and they became his mid morning and mid afternoon snacks. This is my last suggestion, but it's by no means less important than the others. And it is to work on your relationship with food because, as I've said, this behavior of hoarding calories towards the end of the day and of avoiding sugary foods and thinking that you need to be disciplined to avoid losing control around them, these are signs that you're potentially restricting yourself to a harmful degree. To an extent, we all need to exercise a certain degree of cognitive restraint around food because we live in a very challenging modern food environment, which is often referred to as an obesogenic environment, meaning an environment that promotes the development of obesity. And I'm sure I don't need to explain to you why, what with all of the advertisement around highly palatable, high calorie food, the ease with which you can have access to this food, and so on and so forth. However, there's a very important difference in the type of restraint that you can exercise. There are two main types. One is flexible cognitive restraint, and one is rigid cognitive restraint. And I actually delved into these two types in an interview that I recorded in December 2022, I believe. This was with Lauren Conlin, who is a researcher in the area of flexible and rigid restraint, and it was episode 24. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. But the cliff notes of that episode are that flexible cognitive restraint means that you're not always eating the exact food that you want or crave in the exact quantity that you want or crave in the short term. For example, you may think that you want an entire cake, but you also know that that doesn't serve your long-term goals. You are considering how it fits within the context of your entire diet, and you're making usually a choice that's more aligned with your current goals and values. So you may have a slice, or you may not have it at all. And that's an example of flexible cognitive restraint. Whereas if you're exercising rigid cognitive restraints, you're telling yourself that you should never have cake, that cake is bad, and that if you have it, you've failed. If you're engaging in primarily rigid cognitive restraint and you've been struggling with it for a really long time, and you're restricting food and passing judgment over every food choice you make in a negative way for the entire day, it's not just the hunger that catches up with you, as I said earlier, but also you run out of willpower. If you pull an elastic band, eventually it's gonna snap. So as you restrict throughout the day, you're pulling the elastic band of your willpower more and more taut, and then at the end of the day, it finally snaps. So you really want to work on this relationship with food that you have right now, because it's not serving you, it's not serving your physique goals, it's not serving your health goals, and it's not serving your relationship with fitness. Now, dear listeners, it wouldn't be me if I didn't wrap up the episode with a little bit of mindset advice. So here we go. This process can be scary for some people, especially if you do have this scarcity mindset and you've suffered from it for a long time. It's going to feel scary to make a change, and that's okay. It's going to feel scary to eat more, to have regular meals throughout the day, to increase the size of your meals and to increase the daily calories that you're eating. It may even feel terrifying. That's understandable. I had an eating disorder, a restrictive one at that. And at some point, to stop myself from losing weight until I literally disappeared, I had to do the exact same thing. I had to increase my calories. Of course, it was an eating disorder, so it was to a more extreme degree to what you may end up doing. But I felt in a similar way as you may be feeling right now. So believe me when I say that I understand. In addition to that, you've been doing this for a long time. I have clients coming to me who have been doing this for literal years. So it's hard to break the habit. You're going to encounter some psychological resistance. So my suggestion would be to give yourself some compassion and to not expect that you're going to go from zero to hero overnight. Now, you've listened to this podcast, you've acknowledged that you have an issue, and that is absolutely fantastic, because the first step to solving an issue is acknowledging that you have one. Now, what you can do is to start with one meal, just the one. And you don't need to increase its size and also have it earlier in the day. You can just pick one of the two, whichever feels more doable. So maybe it is increasing the size of the meal, but you keep it at the same time. Or maybe it is, I'm going to have the exact same meal, but I'm going to have it a couple of hours earlier. Get into that habit, master that habit gradually, and then add to it. And when I say add, you could choose, okay, I've started having the meal earlier, now I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Or it could be, I'm going to keep it exactly the same size, but it's going to be at this earlier time every day, and now I'm going to bring another meal earlier in the day. So you might start with having breakfast a couple of hours earlier, and then you have lunch a couple of hours earlier. And little by little, you build a more effective eating schedule for yourself. Once you have a regular eating schedule, I can't describe in a podcast how much better you're going to feel, even if your food sources and your total caloric intake do not change at all. You're going to have more energy throughout the day, you're going to have less brain fog, you're going to have fewer mood swings. Your mood on average is going to be uplifted. You're going to have more energy for your work, for family, friends, loved ones, for your workouts. You're going to experience more zest for life. And there are no words that I know to convey how beautiful that is when it finally happens. But believe me, it can happen for you. Now, when that eating schedule is in place and you do see these improvements in yourself, you're also going to find it a little bit easier to tackle the other component of this problem, which is the excessive restriction that you're exerting upon yourself by telling yourself that you need to be disciplined around sugar, that you can't have sugar, that sugar is bad. When you're in a better place mentally, it's going to be easier to allow yourself to have a little bit of dessert after dinner without going overboard, or a cookie without eating the whole pack, or a little bit of ice cream without inhaling the entire tub. Because cutting out all the foods that you perceive as bad or junk or all the negative words that people use for these foods isn't the answer. It's not a long-term strategy. It's going to work only for as long as you can master the willpower to suck all the joy out of your life. And everybody has a breaking point. And when you reach that breaking point, that's when you get into overeating and losing control. So, in order to help your relationship with these foods, you don't want to avoid them. You want to slowly introduce them in your diet on a regular basis. Now, there may be a phase in your life, a season in your life, when it's simply better to avoid them because you are going to overeat them. You're not in that place yet. That's why I said, let's start with the regular eating schedule. But that phase is going to come to an end. You are not going to be in that position forever. Eventually, you are going to be able to tackle these foods that may scare you right now, and you're going to be able to engage with them in a more nurturing way, as opposed to the harmful way with which you've been engaging with them so far. And to tie a bow on this mindset part of the episode, it's important that you push yourself out of your comfort zone. My first piece of mindset advice was to be compassionate with yourself and accept that it's okay that you're not going to make a change overnight. However, you also want to be compassionate with yourself by pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, because it can be easy to start telling yourself, oh, I'm not ready quite yet, I'm not ready quite yet, and then you never actually take the first step. And it's not you talking to yourself, it's your fears talking to you and finding excuses to hold you back. So you need to recognize that you can take your time and it can be a gradual process, but it still needs to happen, because otherwise you are not going to be able to overcome this problem. So I hope that this was valuable to you today. Thank you so much for listening. If you want my one-on-one help, knowledge, and support to overcome this obstacle, I absolutely love the major change that this can bring to somebody's life. So I would love to welcome you as a client and get started on the road towards a better relationship with food. So please fill out the application linked in the show notes, and I will be in touch. Other than that, I'm really thankful, as always, for your time and attention, and until the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.